All right, welcome to another episode of ICU Doc Talk. Today, I'm gonna read an email, and we're gonna do an episode about it. So here, this is from Diego, and he says, I recently discovered your content, your podcast that I listened to so far. I find absolutely brilliant. I appreciate your sharing your ideas, expertise, and beliefs. With that being said, I'd like to make a request about how you learn, take notes, and overall absorb information, particularly when reading books. This has been especially difficult for me because I have ADHD. I have trouble retaining the information I read and putting it into words. I'd love it if you could share your strategies, and thank you for your time and work. So it's such a great question that we're just talking about this whole episode. We're going to talk about how to study, how to retain information, how to school, basically how to do school. So let's start with that. So I don't know what I'll talk about here, but I'll just kind of just shoot from the hip. When talking about my experience, I'll talk about my experience through school and how I learn. Obviously, it goes without saying that needs to be taken with a grain of salt. Everybody learns differently, right? Number one, I don't have any learning disabilities. So right off the bat, I've added an advantage there. And I'm just going to say it that growing up, being middle class and not being totally impoverished, and also being white, it puts you at an advantage. Why? Because you don't need a code switch between different cultures, right? Because white culture, I really don't care if people have a problem with this, that I'm saying this. It's the truth, okay? White culture is the dominant culture. It's the dominant culture in academia. If you are white, if you were reared white into that culture, you don't need a code switch language. You don't need to understand and decipher another culture, okay? If you have a different color of skin or you're an immigrant from another country, you're at a disadvantage right off the bat. You have an uphill battle to even get on the same plane as someone who was born into that culture. All right, that's all I'll say, but I know it's true. I know what I said is true. It's a fact. So I had several advantages to begin with in my academic career right from birth, like very, very clearly. All right. So I will get into how I've done a lot of school. Obviously, I'm a physician, and to be a physician, you have to, in the United States, you have to obviously go to high school, and then you need to do college, which is generally 4 years, and then you do medical school, which is 4 years, and then you do a residency, and residency can range from 3 years to 7 years or 8 years, and then you can do a fellowship, which ranges from a year to 3 years, depending on your specialty and depending on what you go in. Through that process, I have taken many, 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 many exams, and taking exams is a skill. It doesn't necessarily test intelligence. It's testing a skill set and how well someone has prepared for that skill set. Now, yeah, road intelligence stuff. I do think they're related here as well. But let me just start from the beginning. I'll get to how I study, but I do want to start from. I want to give you. I think maybe I've talked about other podcasts, but I'm just going to repeat a couple things here. My journey through education, to kind of give a little more, perspective. So. I was always, so I guess I'll go back to elementary school. So I don't really, elementary school, I think I was a fine student. I don't know, I guess. I was never, I didn't have any learning disabilities. I grew up in a household that valued reading. I grew up with educated parents. Right. My dad, was a lawyer. He had an MBA as well. He's passed since, but so highly educated, and my mother, had a master's in education, was a high school teacher. So right away, I was in a household that valued education, that not just valued education, but was educated as well. And I grew up with people reading books. I was the youngest child of 5, and I grew up with lots of people reading books. Like that was the thing. Not that we didn't watch TV. It's not like we were like a learned house of academics. I don't want to give that impression, right? But my siblings read books, and so I would be like, okay, I'm reading books too. So I also had that advantage, developing that love of reading at a young age. So through elementary school, I don't think I had any. I definitely didn't have any learning disabilities. I think I always did well with grades until I got to junior high. So when I got to junior high, I was super into video games. I still am. I love video games. And math was a huge struggle for me. I did not understand math. Like once I got to just even pre-algebra, I did really, really terrible. No teaching really clicked with me. And I failed algebra in 9th grade, and I got terrible grades in junior high. So I was a year behind in math. And then I don't know what it is. I still, to this day, I don't know what clicked with me. But when I was in high school, I was like, I got to turn my grades around. And I was very dedicated to that. And I got very good grades in high school. And it was, I don't know why. I honestly don't know what changed me. Maybe I was just like, I don't know. I don't know what it is, but I got very good grades in high school. I very much tried, and I cared about getting grades. And I think one of the reasons I was able to get good grades, I was definitely blessed with the gift for a good memory. I know I have a good memory. I've always had a good memory. And that probably had something to do with, another advantage I have is my mother made me take piano lessons. I hated it. Hated piano lessons. I absolutely hated it. But all of my childhood, she made me take piano lessons. And I think that had a profound effect on my ability. She taught me she didn't even really teach me how to read music. I wasn't very good at sight reading, but I could memorize music. I memorized entire concertos, 20, 30-page concertos, and memorized them and could play them. I don't have a photographic memory. I don't want to give the wrong impression, but I have a good memory, and that has served me very well through academia, like very, very well. If I ever take a test that was based purely on memory, like a biology class where you're just regurgitating information, I'd ace all those exams. And I think it's because I was blessed with a good memory, and I don't know why. But anyway, so I think in high school, a lot of exams are, memorization based. So I could do well on exams just by sitting and, memorizing stuff. And then I took AP English and AP Biology. So I got a kind of a leg up in high school. Anyway, for some reason, I kind of turned that corner in high school, and I was very motivated. Despite the fact that I wasn't that good of a, I don't know. I won't talk about it. I won't talk about my youth anymore, but I had some wild days. I'll just leave it at that. All right. So when I got to college, now this is what I really want to focus on. I want to focus on college and med school and how my approach to studying. And there's a lot to it, I think. Okay. So backing it up, it's definitely a skill set that you need to learn. And then also getting good grades is not just about good test taking. That's a really important point. Getting a good grade in a class is not just about doing well on a test. And I want to explain what I mean by that. So backing it up, to get good grades and to do well on a test, you have to be a good student. Now there are people that are very gifted. There are people, and what I mean about being a good student, you got to attend class. You have to understand that teacher and what they expect. You have to know what they expect from you as a student in their class. Number one, you have to know what the expectations are. Now, what I was saying is I think there are people that are truly gifted that they can barely study things. They understand things, click very well, and they can ace tests. I think there's people I'm not one of those people. Now, I'm not saying they don't work hard to do well, but I do think test taking does come easier to some people over others. And there are people that are brilliant test takers. Very, very brilliant test takers. I don't think I'm one of those people. I think I just learned the skill of how to do well at tests. Anyway, so the way I approached when I was in college, I studied chemistry. I got a major in chemistry, and I loved it. Okay, for one thing, I loved it. I had a passion for it. I loved learning, which I guess is also pretty important. Now, you're not always going to love everything that you study and take a test for. Okay, but you need to know that class. You need to understand. You have to show up to class. You have to show up. And what I highly recommend is the teacher needs to know you. Now, that can be very difficult in very large classrooms, but you can do it. One of my key strategies in college, I took very difficult classes, right? I took organic chemistry, inorganic chemistry. I took physical chemistry, thermodynamics. I took quantum mechanics classes. I took calculus 1, 2, and 3. I took physics. So these are hard classes. And again, math was not my strong suit, right? Remember, I failed it in junior high. I happened to have a teacher later in high school that very much clicked, and I finally understood algebra. I understood so well, I just aced every exam she put in front of me because of how she taught me algebra. So I fortunately had that. And with that, confidence is such a big part of this as well. Being confident. Anyway, but you can't just have confidence. You have to build that confidence based on something real. So going back, you need to understand the class. You need to understand the teacher. You need to understand the expectations. You need to show up to class. Now that maybe that means just watching classes online. That's fine. And I know classes are also online. I'm aware of that. I went to college in a day where online classes was kind of a new phenomenon. I think I only did like one of them. But it wasn't really that big of a thing when I was in college. Anyway, the teacher should know you. That was my goal in college, is that the teacher would know me. And how do you get the teachers to know you? You show up to their office during their office hours, and you do it a lot. I would get the teacher to know me. Now, I was doing that for several reasons. You get hints about what they're going to put on an exam, right? You get hints about like, hey, and sometimes they just outright tell you like, yeah, you need to know this. It is human nature. If you get to know somebody, if you get to know a professor or a teacher, you will understand what their expectations are of you further. Seriously, this is gold information, what I'm telling you. Show up to their office hours. They should know you. They really should. You should force them to know you. Now, obviously, don't like do anything inappropriate, but you should be showing up so often that like they can't help but know who you are. And when they see you in their lecturing, they're like, oh yeah, that person I know. They show up to my office hours all the time. Here's why this is so important. So yeah, you get to know the test as well. But when you bomb an exam, right? I didn't ace every exam I took in college. When you say you bombed an exam or you didn't do well on it, and you go back to the teacher to be like, hey, can you help me? A lot of times, seriously, I did this so often. If you explain your reasoning, they would give you points back on your exam. Seriously, that is really important. I can't tell you how many grades I changed, from a B plus to an A minus or an A minus to an A, because I go back to the teacher and be like, hey, I really think that I should have gotten more points on this, because they didn't correct the exam. Their TA corrected their exam. And so often, if they know you and they're sympathetic toward you, what's human nature, they're gonna give you some more points back. I can't tell you how many times I did that. Seriously. I'm telling you pure gold right now, okay? Again, this is all about understanding the system. Test taking does not test the intelligence. It tests how well how your strategy for taking that exam in that class. All right? Now there's that, right? That's kind of like a hack. Now you have to understand the material and you have to study, okay? So how do I study? My other bit of advice. I went to every TA session that I possibly could, and that usually was all of them. Okay. Now again, here's another advantage I have. I didn't have to work. No, I did work. I worked in college. I worked mostly through college. I take that back. But I didn't have to work. I lived at home. My parents helped pay for my college. My college wasn't super expensive. They helped pay for it, and I also worked. But it wasn't like I was in a position where I was working on my own. I was paying rent as an adult, and I had to work, a ton of hours to live. I worked part-time, right? Almost all through college. No, yeah, all through college I had a job. I did telemarketing. Oh my gosh. Amongst a couple other things as well. I also worked in some labs and things like that. But so that's just another advantage. I was in a supportive, loving home, parents that supported my education, and I didn't have to pay rent. So there's all that. I also had a car that I bought, a junker car that I bought off my sister that I didn't have to pay after that, right? Just tons of advantages right off the bat. People don't appreciate these advantages that they're offered in life. Okay, but anyway, so go to TA sessions as much as you can. I had the time to do that. TA sessions is a teacher's aide, right? And a teacher's aide, it's these, aside from lecture, you go to them. They know what's going to be on the exam as well. And you ask them questions, you go over things. It takes work. You have to put in this work. And then you start to understand the material. And then, and particularly around an exam, they really help you, right? They really help you understand. They want to reward you for being a good student. And the reward is you get a better, clearer idea of what's on an exam, right? A physics class I took, the professor would do, I was in his office all the time trying to understand problems, all the time. So much so that before a final exam, he was like, he was so obvious about what was going to be an exam. I knew every problem that was going to be an exam because he hinted at it so strongly to me. I'm telling you, this happened all the time. Didn't mean I didn't understand the exam. It didn't mean I didn't deserve. I still took the exam and understood the material and did well on it, right? It's because I put in a lot of work. I swear I'm going to get to how I study in a minute, but these are other little bits of advice I want to give you. I will get to how I personally study. Okay, so but anyway, going to TA sessions as much as possible, going to labs as much as possible. Now, many college courses, your exams are, the midterms and the finals and the exams are an enormous part of your grade, right? One of the main things is also, you got to stay ahead of the curve. I swear to you, now it's been a long time since I've been in college, right? But even when teachers, from my experience, they said that their exams were not curved, they were. They were. My favorite thing was when a teacher would write too hard an exam. When I sat down to take an exam and I start taking it, I'm like, this exam is ridiculous. This is impossible. I was happy because I knew that everybody else was going to bomb that exam. And the teacher was going to have to either not make it count or dramatically curve it. That was an awesome thing when the exam was like ridiculously hard. Like this teacher, and it always happened with newer teachers, like graduate students, particularly graduate students that were, teaching. They would always write way too hard at exams, and you're like, this is ridiculous, dude. You gotta. Anyway, that was always my favorite thing. So you just staying ahead of the curve is extremely important in getting good grades and doing well in exams. Having people to study with, very important. Now you can have formal study groups, but just bouncing off ideas of each other, even if it's a text thread or something like that. I had study groups all through college and through high school. Not high school. Well, maybe high school a little bit, and through medical school. Very essential. You want to know how other people are feeling about stuff. You want to support one another, and you figure things out together, and you learn together. So important. That is so incredibly important and also you make very good friends that way, right? I have lifelong friends from college and medical school that I studied with. Lifelong friends, right? Very dear people to me in my life. That I'm still in contact with today because of that. So study groups are very key. Okay, so it's such a good topic. I have so much to say about it. So let's talk about how I approach an exam, how I study for exam, how I approach the material for that exam. So number one, as I said, just to reiterate, I went to every lecture, and just reiterate my points. Every lecture. Go to office hours as much as possible. Ask questions. Even when I didn't really have questions, I would still go, right? I had time to do this because of my support system. But asking as many questions as possible. Going to the TA sessions as much as possible. Okay. So but then you do have to know the material, right? These are just little hacks of the system to support you as much as possible. Oh wait, I wanted to say one more thing. You got to do the homework. You have to do homework. So, this is my point. You got to stay ahead of that curve, and exams are a big part of your grade. But if you do really well on the homework and you make sure you do it, that can turn and you get like near 100% on all of your homework in that class. Hopefully they have homework in your class. That can turn your grade, right? That can take you from a B+ to an A- or an A- to an A. I did it many, many times. I made sure, particularly in my math classes, I got near 100% on my homework. How did I get 100% on my calculus homework? I went to the math tutor lab that my university had, right? I would go to them. I'd spend hours there. I'd be overwhelmed. I'd be frustrated. Calculus is hard. But I would have a tutor. I would sit down. They would explain it to me. I'd make sure I got 100% or near 100% on every single homework. And I know because I did that. I got A's in all my calculus classes. And I know that was part of it. I wouldn't have gotten A's in those classes without it. Okay, so doing the homework, extremely important, doing the extra material. If there's an opportunity for extra credit, of course you do that. Of course you do it. Okay? Again, I was also single and did not have children through college. So my experience is very unique. I had a major advantage over what many people do. Okay? I very much recognize that. And I had advantages in numerous. I didn't have any mental health problems, right? And no learning disabilities. I just want to reiterate that. All right, so finally, okay, so how do I study? How do I approach material? So I go to lecture, go all that stuff, read the syllabus. I know I'm repeating myself because it's important. And now I studied for hours and hours in my library. So the way I like to study, I don't like to have music. I don't like to study with somebody. Like when I'm actually studying, I don't like to study with anybody. I do it on my own. I don't like to have music. I like to be in a quiet place, a library or my house, whatever, in an office. Minimal distractions, no sound. And I like to read textbooks, right? I love textbooks, actually. I know a lot of people don't. There's different types of learners, right? There's like visual learners, blah, blah, blah. But nobody just learns in one way. Like if you're a visual learner, you also learn other ways as well. So you need to engage all of those senses that, how you learn. So I like to read textbooks. But what's important is reading something, just reading a text is probably, and just doing that is probably one of the poorest ways to retain information, right? Just reading something and moving on. Your comprehension may not be well. You may not have comprehended everything, and you may not retain something, just reading something. So what is very, very key to me is transcribing the information to a notebook or note cards. To me, that is extremely important for me to retain and understand information. Very, very, very important for me. Transcribing with a pen by hand. So, if I was reading a chemistry textbook, I'm like, okay, I know it's going to cover these things, or whatever extra material the teacher provided. I would read it, like, here's my important points. Okay, I'm going to transcribe them into my notebook. And that was my key, is my notebook. That was so I would like, okay, I'm going to write down these points again. I'm going to put little stars. I'm going to highlight things. So that just doing that helps to retain my information, right? So I'm transcribing things, and I'm comprehending because I'm transcribing. I'm comprehending even better because I'm repeating the information in my mind by writing it down again. And now I'm creating a study guide, right, in my notebook. I preferred notebooks. I didn't like note cards. You might like note cards, right? And then for that class, then I have a notebook that has my condensed notes that then I study over and over and over again. It's repetition. So I'd study those over and over and over again, my now condensed notes. Maybe those are note cards for you. That is a very key way that I retain information, okay? And then you have to practice, right? Particularly like math or chemistry. It's problem-based, science-based. You must practice over and over and over again. You have to practice the problems. You have to practice whatever workbook they gave you. You have to put the work in. You won't do well on exams if you don't do this, obviously. All that other stuff I said is just dressing to getting a good grade, but you have to show up knowing what you're doing on an exam. One of the best feelings in the world is doing all that, preparing all that, and crushing an exam. One of the best feelings in the world. That pure joy. Just destroying an exam, just sitting down and being like, oh, I got this. Boom. It's an amazing feeling. But you have to put the work in to do it. Now that's coming from me, somebody who doesn't have any, learning disabilities or anything. I can only imagine how much more work and how difficult it is for somebody that has more obstacles than I have and that I have had in life. Okay, so just to reiterate, I think the things that helped me the most, the way I study the most, is studying the source material, whether that's a textbook or slides from the professor or the teacher or whatever it is, transcribing those things, distilling them into a notebook, studying that notebook over and over again, and then doing practice problems of whatever is needed for that coursework. That's my core way of studying for me, okay? Now that doesn't apply to I took classes like art history and like jazz and other classes. So obviously you may not be doing a lot. I took philosophy classes, right? And English classes and stuff. So this doesn't always apply. This is why you have to really get to know the class, the professor, and what's expected of you. Like a philosophy class, that's a lot of times that's writing essays, right? That's a completely different type of thing. Most of this has to do with the sciences, right? That's more what I'm talking about, which is what most of my coursework has been in. I think my other advice still stands for classes that aren't science-based, that you need to get to know the class, the professor, you need to go to study, you need to have study aids or study partners if you can, and go to TA sessions as much as possible and get to know that course and that professor and what they're wanting, what they're looking for. Very, very important. You cannot just be like an island. You can't just, in my opinion, watch some lectures and call it good and then, write an essay and put it in. You got to get to know what they want, what they're expecting. Very, very important. But a lot of this does apply to other coursework as well. Now, when it comes to actually taking an exam, as I said, it's a skill. And you have to get good at it. So taking an exam, time is so important. So there's lots of psychology, right, that goes into an exam. Before I take an exam, like a big exam, I always make sure I eat a little something. So I have, glucose available to my brain. Use the restroom beforehand. Okay. Try to have those bodily urges and functions, whatever, at a minimum, so you're not distracted. And the way I approach an exam is you have to be time conscious. If you're not going to know the answer for everything, you're not going to be satisfied. Not always. Sometimes you're very I took some exams I was very prepared, and and I knew I did well, but not all exams, right? And you have to be okay with the uncertainty that you might not have the right answer, and you have to move on. You cannot be a perfectionist on the exam. Otherwise, you'll perseverate over that one question. And then what if you don't complete the exam, right? I know that's a problem for lots of people, probably with ADHD as well. You have to finish the exam. I know that's it goes without saying, but you cannot perseverate on that one question. Do it a little bit, be like, this is the best I got, and move on. You have to do that. You must, or you may risk not finishing, or you may talk yourself out of an answer. So you just got to cut your losses and move on. Very important to do. And then you got to look at the time. You got to look at the clock. When I took the MCAT, right, that's the entrance exam into medical school. It's a very difficult exam. It's very long. It's like 8 hours or something. I didn't come up with a study aid that someone taught me. Is I came up with a chart that by this section I have to be at this time, and by this section I have to be at this time, and if I'm not, then I'm behind. So you may have to do something like that. Have a time chart that you write out at the beginning of the exam. Take notes on the exam. Like, write out as much as possible. Even rewrite the question if you're not sure about it. Rewrite it. Condense down what that question is saying in your own words on your scratch paper. Rewrite it out. Reframing and rewriting it might help to calm yourself down, right? It's easy to get panic on an exam. It's very easy. I've had that before. I've had that experience, that panicky feeling. The brain doesn't work when it's panicked. It doesn't. You cannot think critically when you're panicked. That's just biology. You have to find ways of calming down. I definitely, on exams, I will take a moment. You have time. Believe me. You have time to close your eyes and breathe 5 times. You have time. That's not a waste of time. If you feel your anxiety rising, your panic rising, close your eyes, put your pen down or whatever, or the key. Don't look at the keyboard. Close your eyes and breathe 5 times. That is very, very important. I've done it. I've done it many times on exams. Okay, and then if you have time, go over your exam again. I'm a fairly fast test taker. I almost always have time to go over my answers one more time. I have learned from my experience that usually changing my answers does not result in a better exam for me. But the reason I'm going over it again is I may have missed something obvious in that question. I'm like, I misunderstood this. Okay, now I understand. But if I go over the question again and I'm still very doubtful, I usually don't change my original answer. From what I've learned from my own test taking and statistics of question banks, I usually don't have a better score when I go and change my answers after I go through it again. That's just my experience. That's just me. Now, as you go through your career in academia, whatever it is you do, test taking gets easier because as an anesthesia resident, I had big exams also, but it gets a little easier because I'm actually studying the same thing over and over again, and I'm doing the same thing over and over again, right? So as you go through your career, the tests are more towards what you're doing anyway, right? So I can take tests off the top of my head without studying. I don't have to take a lot of tests these days, but I do have to take a test for to maintain my board, to make sure I'm board certified, right? And there are questions related to anesthesiology and critical care, right? I don't study for those. I just flip through them because I do them every day, and I get most of the questions right as I should, because it's my job and I'm supposedly an expert in the field. But as you study more and more and you get more and you're in that niche, test taking gets a little easier. But it still may be very anxiety provoking. So anyway, I hope these tips have helped and sharing a little bit of my journey through test taking. It's different for everybody. You got to find your own style of doing things. So I hope that helps. Okay, and then I have another email I want to read, and it's related to the topic. This is from Krista. Last name is withheld. Krista says, "Hey doc, I have been an RN on a step-down unit at a level 1 trauma center for 5 years. Tonight, I saw my first VA ECMO cannulation and was in awe. I know the very basics of ECMO, but now my curiosity is piqued, and I think I may be interested in becoming an RN primer. What learning resources or books would you recommend for someone wanting to learn the ins and outs of ECMO? I don't mind reading textbooks for fun if you think they're good references. Any and all recommendations are appreciated. Thank you very much. Enjoy your content." So ECMO, it's one of those things that you read about it and you read about it and you read about it. And, it helps to know the basics, but you're not comfortable being an actual practitioner until you do it, which is like most things. But I will say, I will recommend one nice little textbook. It's small, that I read early on that helped me just get the basics down. There's lots of information about ECMO, and it's hard to find like a consolidated resource. The book that I recommend for Krista and for anybody that wants a nice primer on ECMO, it's called ECMO in the Adult Patient, Core Critical Care. And the first author is, I'm going to butcher the name, Vielsteke. I'll spell the last name, Vuylsteke. And I just checked on Amazon, and it's about $40. ECMO and the Adult Patient. I think it's a good book. I really think it's a good resource. It's brief. You can read it, over a couple days. And it's a nice primer. It's perfect. It's perfect for someone like Krista that wants to just start from the basics and go from there. And it doesn't just go, it's not just the basics. It also goes into different, like hybrid configurations and things like that. I think it's a great book to start. And then, you should look at your institutional resources, right? If you're at an institution that's doing ECMO, it's a level 1, trauma place usually. And that institution probably has an intranet. And on that intranet, you can probably find institutionally made, good quality people that know what they're doing that have made reading material for you to read, whether that's PowerPoint slides or like workbooks and stuff. I guarantee Krista, where she works, and if you're at an academic center that does, or even not, that does ECMO, I bet your institution has resources to learn from, and you should look into it. Like my institution has tons and tons and tons. So I hope that helps. All right, let's get to some books. First book is a nonfiction read. It's called Why Civil Resistance Works, The Strategic Logic of Nonviolent Conflict. It's by two authors, Erica Chenoweth, Chenoweth, and Maria J. Stephen. It was published in 2011. It's about 320 pages. So again, it's called Why Civil Resistance Works. And it's a book written with a specific goal, and it is to convince you, the reader, that nonviolent resistance is superior to violent resistance. That's their goal. They're very, they're very outspoken about that. They're presenting evidence. They want to convince you of that. They delicately and, in my opinion, succinctly lay out their argument in a scholarly way while providing their methodology. They looked at both violent and nonviolent resistance movements all over the world from 1900 up until 2006, and they found clear statistical evidence that nonviolent resistance is more successful at regime change from a civilian population than violent resistance. Those are their conclusions. They came up with a bunch of exclusion criteria. They looked at violent resistance and nonviolent, and that was their conclusion. Part of their arguments is that one of the main advantages and characteristics of a nonviolent movement is that it has low barrier for mass public participation. That's key. Violent resistance almost always relies on a smaller group of people and more fragile networks and unreliable external assistance, like from other countries. The low barrier of nonviolent resistance opens the door for a larger cohort of the public across racial and class and ideological lines, and that provides the impetus for the movement, and it insidiously chips away at the power and influence of the regime who's in control. It is way, way easier for a regime to crack down on a violent group who uses terrorism and guerrilla warfare in the resistance, right? The regime is provided with the social and political justification and the ammunition to apply force and violence to destroy a violent opposition movement. It's way easier for them to do that, okay? Just think about Israel's reaction to Hamas, to what they did, to the Hamas terrorist attacks. It gave Israel the ammunition to destroy Gaza, which is what they wanted to do, right? to begin with. Nonviolent resistance is more like trying to nail Jell-O to the wall because it is more broadly spread among the populace and it instills self-reflection in the regime members and it often defection and collapse of the regime. It happens. You may not know about it, but it has happened many times throughout history. It's worth stating that violent resistance can be successful and has been successful in regime change, but they most certainly succeed at much lower rates than nonviolent movements, according to the authors and the evidence they provide. Additionally, once a violent movement succeeds, they're way more likely to have a harsher civil rights abuses and oppressive instruments in place that are just as bad as the outgoing regime or even worse. Think of the Bolshevik Revolution, right? Great example. Or the Mao Revolution. Another very, very good example. The authors provide numerous case studies, including the fall of Shah and Iranian Revolution in the 1970s, the fall of Marcos in the Philippines, the Palestinian Intifadas, and others. What many of these examples have in common is mass non-cooperation with the state with boycotts, strikes, and protests. The authors are very careful with how they present these examples. They fully recognize that just because a nonviolent movement helped displace an authoritarian regime, it doesn't mean good times roll after that. This is especially true in post-Shah theocratic rule in Iran, right? So the Shah was basically collapsed under public mass non-cooperation, but it was replaced by de facto apartheid. In Iran, it was displaced by a theocratic authoritarian rule, right? So good things didn't happen after that, but the nonviolence resistance was successful in changing the regime, and it didn't do much for the de facto apartheid occurring in Israel after a very well organized and transiently effective intifadas. But here's what the authors argue quite effectively, in my opinion, with robust evidence. Nonviolence campaigns are not only more likely to succeed in regime change, but they more often have a more liberal democracy afterwards, like with parliamentary politics. And they're less likely to relapse into civil war. Violent coups more likely have rebranded authoritarian rule and more often have subsequent civil wars, right? Think of Yugoslavia, think of Spain. I mean, there's just so many examples. Many argue that nonviolent resistance and violent resistance have a symbiotic relationship and that any success of a nonviolent resistance is always owed to violence. But the authors did not find this to be true. Most of the evidence is that violent resistance actually has the opposite effect. The nonviolent movements get lumped into the violent movement, and together they are treated with justified violence from the regime. Think about the BLM protests, right? They're mostly peaceful, but there was some violence and, rioting and looting. Not very small amount. But just that small amount of violence and rioting, people just lump it together with the entire mostly peaceful movement of BLM. And it gives them ammunition to just be like, oh, they're destroying America, just whatever nonsense. Anyway, for me, I'm deeply troubled right now in 2024 about the extremism happening on both sides of the political spectrum. Yes. Now, I'm not a moderate, okay? I lean left, so the threat from right-wing extremism is very clear to me. That's obvious. There is a clear global neo-fascist movement that is taking over the political world. That's unassailable. However, it would be very unwise to assume that there is not also a loud minority of leftists that also seek change and believe that violence is not only the only means of achieving change, but is in fact virtuous, right? So I posted about this book on social media. I got lots of hate of people that think violence is the only way, from leftist people. The Marxist vanguard revolution ideology is very troubling to me, and it is a tactic that I do not think is effective and I condemn. We have abundant historical evidence that violent vanguardism has resulted in rebanded authoritarianism and human rights violations, perhaps to the same degree as right-wing fascist neoliberal and neocolonialism. Violent extremism, regardless of its ideology, is immoral, unethical, and ineffective largely, and should be widely condemned in my opinion. So it's very troubling seeing people calling for violence on both sides of the political spectrum. And I kind of want to take an aside. So when I engage with people that are self-proclaimed communists or Marxists or whatever. And I enjoy reading communist texts and Marxist texts and stuff. I enjoy reading it. I love the critique of Marxism, of capitalism. But as you know, I'm not, or you may not know, I'm not a communist. I'm not a Marxist. I am oftentimes very troubled when I talk to people that are entrenched communists and Marxists because when you engage with people that are so entrenched with this ideology, the problem with talking with like a communist is that they must be right? There is no room for dissent or dissenting opinions when you talk to them. They are, in their opinion, they are correct. And the way of communism, Marxism, and having vanguard ideology come in and impose an authoritarian rule, many do want that modernly. I know they do. You can't have a conversation with them, and you ask them to explain dialectical materialism. You ask them to explain all these things, and they do it in a very smoke and mirror way, a very roundabout way, a very sanctimonious and smug way that you couldn't possibly understand because you're not intelligent enough. And if you have a dissenting opinion, you are automatically indoctrinated by Western propaganda. It is a very rigid, fragile ideology, and it's concerning. Now, that's not to say I'm more deeply troubled by neo-fascist right-wing extremism, which has much, much more power, and the American plutocracy right now is a mild form of neo-fascism. It really is. Whether it's a Democrat-controlled or a Republican-controlled office at a federal level, it's mild neo-fascism, and that's being kind, honestly. So I think more of the concern is with right-wing extremism and how the American political landscape is already very right-wing, and Democrats are, they're centrist at best. The Democratic Party is not leftist at all. But I just want to say I have observed this with people that are very leftist, that are self-proclaimed communists, and it is. I don't say this lightly. It is cult-like mentality. It very much is. If you disagree with me, please email me. I want to hear your opinion. I very much want to talk and engage with people that I strive to understand communism and the USSR and communist states. I read lots of literature about it. I love to learn, but every time I try to learn, if I don't agree, then I'm a Western propagandist. It's really absurd, honestly. But anyway, email me. If you disagree with what I'm saying, I want to hear what you have to say. If you are specifically a communist or a Marxist, or maybe not self-proclaimed, but you have sympathies for those ideologies, explain it to me. Seriously, explain dialectical materialism to me. Explain how it's a science. It's not. I know it's not. But people try to explain that it is. Explain it to me. My email is icudrecmo, ecmo@gmail.com. Explain it to me. Anyway, I digress. Okay, I got to talk about another nonfiction book. I've been doing too many nonfiction books. I have too many. So I got to unload some more. This one's called Travelers in the Third Reich by Julia Boyd. It was published in 2017. It's about 460 pages. I listened to the audiobook for this. So basically, what did the world think of the new regime in the 1930s that had legally taken over of the Weimar Republic? Were they roundly condemned for their anti-Semitism or ultra-nationalism? What would you have thought of this regime change, right? Everybody thinks that. What would I have thought? What would you have thought of Nazi Germany? At the world's most prestigious scientific and cultural center, Germany. This book opens up, the Travelers in the Third Reich, opens up the letters and correspondence and journal entries of visitors to the Third Reich during the intervening time between the formal fall of the Weimar Republic and World War II. And I will tell you this, people weren't too bent out of shape over the Nazis taking power. They weren't. Despite the fallout of World War I, Germany was still highly revered and a choice vacationing spot for Europeans and Americans. The Nazi uprising was not seen as a terrifying totalitarian state to most. It was either a curious oddity or signs of a new, prosperous age in Germany. What's a little harmless anti-Semitism when the streets are clean and the girls are pretty and the towns are lovely? That's a lot of visitors. That's what they thought. This was the prevailing sentiment to Nazi Germany during this time. Either that or there was ardent foreign supporters of the aims of Nazi Germany, right? The KKK was basically the Nazi Party of America, and they were huge at this time in the United States. The Olympic Games were held in Nazi Germany, where the party strived to hide the uglier side of their anti-Semitism, and they presented an organized and polite people to the world. Hitler and the Nazi Party, in fact, seeked the approval of England and America and were constantly courting their people through carefully cultivated tourism. The famed black sociologist W.E. Du Bois visited Nazi Germany in 1936 and actually expressed words of admiration for what the Nazi Party had done with the economy, himself being unable to distinguish National Socialism from communism. However, Du Bois, he clearly condemned and saw the horrific treatment of the Jewish people in Nazi Germany. People during this time were very confused about what the Nazi Party even stood for. The Nazis were ardently anti-communistic and anti-Bolshevik, yet they used National Socialism as a means to collectivize national wealth and resources, and it was part of their party plan, right? How is National Socialism different from Red Communism, to which the Nazis were so vehemently opposed? People were confused then, just as they're confused now. And that's why this is such an important book to read today. Sure, the Nazis used a form of state socialism to protect and favor the ethnic in-group, right? The white Aryan race. This gives ample ammunition to call them National Socialists or a left-wing, a left-wing movement. However, when you look at the underlying ideology of the Nazi Party, it was very clearly extreme conservatism. It was anti-homosexual, anti-intellectual, book burnings, white supremacy, Bismarckian, monarchical, racial segregation, anti-urban, anti-Marxist. It was a rainbow coalition of the rural and racially discontent who scapegoated the Jews, the communists, the Marxists, and the leftists, and stoked the very real grievances of the Treaty of Versailles and massive poverty, unemployment, inflation, and the hunger of the German people. That's what the Nazi Party is. The Nazi Party was a contortionist party molding its rhetoric to fit its audience to gain power. People are confused then about what the Nazi Party stood for, then and now. This book helps to see the reality that it is complicated, but it will help you to see the clarity. So I highly recommend it. Travelers in the Third Reich by Julia Boyd. That's it for me. Thanks for the emails. You can email me at icudrecmo, ecmo at gmail.com. Give me ideas to do podcasts. I did this episode today because someone emailed me and it was a good idea, so I did it. Please leave a review on Apple or Spotify, wherever you listen, to help the podcast grow. I do this for free. There's no advertising. I make no money off of anything I do on social media or the podcast, and I plan on continuing to do that. So help make it grow, because it's up to listeners to make it grow, right? Because there's no financial incentive. There's no advertising. And it's grown quite a bit. And it's because people listen to it, right? It's because of the content. It's not because of an advertiser. So keep it that way. I don't plan on ever doing that. But you listening to it right now, you help it grow by leaving reviews and talking about it and sharing it in an organic way, in a non-commercialized way, which is how it'll always be. So anyway, thanks for listening. Bye.